How you guys doing?
Yeah. My name's Erin Ryan, and I'm a master's candidate right now at BU. I've been teaching for about 5 years now, and the last 3 years I've been teaching specifically students that are in the hospital. So students that are going through not just high school and adolescence, which is tough enough, but these are students that are going through different kinds of disabilities. They're trying to fight depression, they're trying to fight anxiety. So I've been working with these kids for a long time, and they were my main inspiration for talking to you today and putting together this presentation. So I'm excited to also share the mic with some incredible guys. Astolfi, let us know what's up.
So my name is Michael Astolfi. I'm a digital strategies producer at Carnegie Corporation of New York, and I'm also a game developer. I'm the co-creator of a game called Blindside, which is a game that allows players to experience some of the challenges faced when one's lost the ability to see. I'll be talking about that a little bit more a little later.
Cool. And my name is Andrew Ryan. I am a business analyst at Boston University. My background is in American Studies, and currently I run the website and Twitter Whiskey and Games.
Sweet.
That's for after the panel. We're just education today.
Right. I just had a quick question. Raise your hand if you are out there and you are a part of a development team or you're interested in developing games.
Woo!
All right, cool. We got some developers in the house. Great. What about teachers? Anybody out here teaching? Sweet. Can we give it a hand for the teachers? I'm looking around too just to see how many students in the house today. All right, cool. All right. So we have a fair number, I think, of everybody here. I'm going to jump up because my part is first here.
And what you're looking at right now is just some of the games. These are a few of the games that we all sort of identified as triggers to get us thinking about the link between education and video games for each one of us.
So, just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about a couple of essential questions, things that we have going in our minds all the time. I'm going to talk a little bit about some foundations for the teachers in the house. I'm going to talk a little bit about educational theories and how we see those theories used in games. We're going to talk to Mike a little bit about experiential learning, and then Andy's going to take it away with the games and education talk he's got going. And then I just wanted to show everybody how I've been trying to put this into practice already using a lesson that I designed and some students that were incredible last summer that were hospitalized, but they did some really incredible things to develop an idea for future educational games. And then of course we want to open up the mic and hear from you, hear from what you have as far as ideas or questions. So, we're going to start with some quick essential questions.
So, the first one, just right off the bat, is are successful educational video games even possible? So can game and curriculum developers design historically accurate and grade appropriate worlds reflective of different periods in history?
I'd like to know how they're going to assess student learning. I think I'm speaking for a lot of other teachers out there too that want to know how we can actually assess. Make sure that students are learning the curriculum that we want them to be learning, and how we could tie in assignments that they could complete, how we would be able to track their student progress as well, make sure that they are having a great educational experience while also having a good time.
I'm curious how we can create video games that will accommodate students with a range of ability levels and learning styles.
And I want to know what related curriculum looks like. I want to know how we can specifically support mobile student learning for those kids that are out of school, that are learning at home or learning in the hospital, and how we can create maybe parent or teacher guides that can help go through that game process.
And a lot of this is about what we can do right now. We're certainly going to be looking at some of the past, the foundations of video games and education, and some of the possibilities for the future, but we want you guys to leave here jazzed about certain things that you can do right away and things that we can take action on immediately.
So speaking of which, how many of you here have died of dysentery in the past? Dun, dun, bad water. So I went straight to the source here, and I spoke with the creator of the original Oregon Trail game. His name is Don Rawich, and we spoke for a little while on the phone. I let him know what I was doing, and I said, Don, is there anything that you can tell me? You've been there, done that. You've created this game that has attained worldwide success. You ended up donating it, and we still see it in app form now, but he was a little sad that the app form now was a pretty big departure from what it originally was. He had created this game in the 1970s, back when this technology was brand new, and he had some really great suggestions here. He said that your data can't be limited to just your textbooks, and also I'm a social studies teacher, so I'm always thinking about history. To me, everything is history, science, and math, ELA, all of that. I would like to teach, and I had to teach. So he said, don't just limit that data to history textbooks, and I couldn't agree more. He wants research to go alongside the video game play, which is a really important part of it. Bring in diaries, bring in movies, bring in those primary source documents, so that students can feel like they're doing research, but it also allows kids to feel like they're getting different versions of history, right? And it allows them to sort of explore, identify at least bias, not just the bias of the information that's out there, but their own bias, and kind of grapple with that. And he said definitely encourage student research alongside that, playing with the game. A couple of components, too, that he said that were extremely important as far as defining characteristics for an effective game. He said, let those students play. Let them have a role in the historical story. And make sure that these are situations and challenges that these students are invested in, that they care about, right? We want them to be inspired by their learning. And also using a complex model, making sure that the game is designed in a very complex way, but make sure that the gameplay itself is very simplified, so that anybody, any age level can sit down and play these games. We also wanted to make sure that their reasoning, that their decision-making skills are being practiced, and we want to make sure that the game never plays the same way twice, right? How does this game play if I'm a different character? So I think that's important too. Making sure too that we have accurate historical information and giving students really a control of their own environment. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the theories. I looked into a really interesting article that came out from Science Direct, and the authors there, they said that they had reached out to 55 educational games that had met the criteria for what they considered an educational game. They asked the authors, 24 of them responded, and they said, how many of you have used foundational educational theory in the design of your games? And when they got these responses back, it turned out that 22 of those games had been based on actual learning theories. So I think that adds a little concrete foundation of what we're talking about. I want to talk about two specific theories, one of which we're going to hear a lot more about when Mike takes a stand here. But discovery learning theory is one of my favorites, and it has to do with interacting with environments. As I'm talking about these theories too, think of the last game that you played, and if you ever experienced some of the things that I'm talking about with these learning theories as you played the game. This idea of grappling with tough questions, debating controversial issues, experimenting with your environment. It all has to do with the idea that learning is cyclical, it's a cycle. A student can observe something, then they reflect, they think about it, maybe they abstract on it. If I do this, what will the consequence be? And then they test their theory, they experiment. And like I said, it's cyclical. You can start anywhere. It could be a teacher asking an abstract question to a classroom of students, and then they experiment to see what different observations they can make. So you can really start this at any stage, and you can go any direction you want as a teacher. So there's a little discovery learning theory there for you. The next one, Michael's going to be talking about experiential learning theory, learning through experience, that you're engaged in real-life experiences. And I would argue that you can have real-life experiences even in a virtual world. So they're taking that time to reflect on what they're doing. The students that are playing these games, they're interacting with other beings and parts of their environment and think about what they're seeing. They see things, they have to observe them, they have to feel emotions, they have to do things. We already see experiential learning theory. We see it all over the place. You'll see it when students do any kind of role-playing activity, or if they're doing model building, or if they're doing field studies, and for our purposes, when they're doing simulations and playing games. Games are a part of somebody who wants to design these games and know curriculum and gameplay, here they are. These theories have been tested. I mean, this is Dewey here. 1938 is when these theories started. A couple more just quick theories I just want to show you guys. Learn by doing. This means that learning to do something is important than just learning to know it. So actually applying more pragmatic practices, applying it to the real world, I think is a really important part here. I think that it's great that we look at things like pragmatism, that students are thinking, they're seeing, that they're feeling, and that they're doing. Guided experimental learning, what I like to call GEL, is when you have students that are given clearly defined procedures, which sounds like a game. They're giving demonstrations, which also sounds a little bit like a game. The students are supposed to be practicing on increasing levels of difficulty. Kind of sounds like a game. And my favorite part of GEL is that these students are supposed to get feedback. So that means that not only parents can play these games too, but teachers can also be playing these games. And teachers can be experts before students even pick up their console. And of course, query-based is all about asking questions. And asking questions, it has about 4 phases. The students are supposed to form a hypothesis, they're supposed to experiment, they're supposed to interpret the outcome, and they're supposed to communicate the results. Does that sound like a process that's familiar to anybody, especially the science teachers out there?
Scientific method.
There you go. So, scientific method, those 4 steps, we can absolutely grab onto that and use that so that we can be the leaders. We can be the ones that are showing these students the different levels of learning and have them grow by showing them that we already have done this, so we know what we're talking about. So, I want to show you a couple more examples here and pass it on to Mike. He's going to take it away with experiential learning.
Thanks, Erin. So, I'm going to talk about a little bit how we can use games to enable more experiential learning. So as you're aware, games engage players through the choices that players make as they play. Games, of course, are interactive mediums, so they respond back to those choices. And the design of the game system will end up affecting the choices that the players make and how they end up playing the game. In the end, the game's design will result in the experience that players end up taking away from the game. This, of course, is a screenshot from Telltale's The Walking Dead, and the experience that players took away from it was crying forever. Maybe a better example is how death mechanics are handled in World of Warcraft versus an EverQuest. So, in World of Warcraft, there's a very little cost to die. You have to run back and pick up your corpse, but you're invulnerable while you're doing it. You have to pay a little money later to repair your items, but you're not going to lose any items really unless you, I don't know, quit paying your subscription fee. But because there's such a low cost to death, players feel much more free to explore and experiment in the world, and sometimes to try reckless things. This is an illustration of the infamous Leroy Jenkins. We're dying in a really creative way. Death in EverQuest works a little differently. You pay a much higher cost to EverQuest for death. You actually lose a significant amount of experience, which you earn very slowly, and so represent days of work. You then have to run back and pick up your corpse in a very vulnerable state, then in your armor or weapons, and you're actually able to be killed again. Now, you probably died in a dangerous area, so when you run back in naked, there's a good chance that you're going to get killed again and lose even more experience. On top of that, if you don't pick up your corpse soon enough, it'll actually disappear and take with it all of your armor and weapons, which will really be a huge setback for the player. Because of this, death is really significant in EverQuest, and players are much more cautious and careful in the game. They really respect the world and respect the environment and play much more conservatively because of that. They're very unlikely to pull Leroy Jenkins.
Leroy Jenkins.
What I really like about this is that a single design choice really has a big impact on both the way that players play the game and the experience they take away from the game. I played both of these MMOs, and I know that I have much greater respect for EverQuest's world. I like view it as a much more sort of dangerous place where I really need to be careful what I'm doing, where as in World of Warcraft, it's a little more of a playground. Players will take away an experience from every game they play, and these experiences can be made meaningful by their designers and can be used to communicate with and educate their players. I think that innovation in this space represents a really powerful way in which games can be used as tools for education and change. Now, I want to go through a few examples of games that I think do a really good job of using experiential learning in interesting ways. And the first one of these might be a little surprising. It's the classic board game Monopoly. Well, actually, it's not Monopoly. It's an early precursor to Monopoly called the Landlord's Game. So this early precursor was acted in 1904 by Maryland actress Elizabeth McGee Phillips, and she wanted to use it as a tool for teaching the philosophy of Georgism, which was created by Henry George, a writer and political economist, who believed that people own only what they could create, and so land, which had been created by no one, should be held collectively. He also viewed landlords in particular as unproductive parasites on capitalism because they charge people to use land yet produce nothing themselves. So this is an image of the original board for the Landlord's Game from that 1904 patent, and you can see right away it looks a lot like a Monopoly board. It actually played very similar to the game was to buy properties and develop monopolies you could use to drive competitors into bankruptcy. This was designed intentionally to allow players to experience for themselves how unfair the then consistent land grabbing was, and try to get players to react against that feeling, and hopefully in the future try to do something to change it. I personally think this explains why Monopoly is not that much fun to play unless you're going for Monopoly. But I think in any case that the Landlord's Game is a great example of a game that teaches through a player's experience, and I think it's interesting that the experience was designed to be sort of unpleasant. The next thing I want to talk about is a game called Spent. So Spent is a text-based simulation of the tough decisions that one may face while trying to survive a month on just $1,000. And it was created by the Urban Ministries of Durham, North Carolina, to highlight how easy it can be for one to fall into homelessness. The game presents players with a series of tough questions. They range from what kind of job you're going to take, where you're going to live, whether or not you're going to buy insurance. As the game goes on, you might have the opportunity to ask for help. The game actually lets you reach out to Facebook and ask friends to help you get through tough questions, which I think is a neat way for them to spread the game, but also adds a little twist of immersion there. You'll be able to ask friends for help in real life. As you go on, questions get a little tougher. You might have to help a child with a social issue at school, which might end up costing you some money. You might have to deal with a parent who's sick, or I think this might be one of the most gut-wrenching questions: what to do about a sick pet. You can see that your options are to pay for treatment for $400, to have it put to sleep for $50, or to let your pet suffer. I, at this point in the game, the upper left there, only have $390, so I'm going to be facing a tough decision at this point in the game.
Can you just quit the game and cry at that point?
That is always an option. What I think is great about this is that it really creates an effective and immersive experience from just a simple text-based interface, and it lets players' imagination really take care of the rest, especially with questions like that last one. By having to make these decisions themselves, players begin to relate to these kinds of circumstances and imagine how something similar could happen to them. The game is designed to make players more sympathetic to those dealing with poverty and homelessness by experiencing the process of how one might become homeless themselves, and I think does a really good job of it.
Yeah, empathy is one of the practices I know as a social studies teacher is right up there. I want to make sure that when I'm talking about a specific time in history that my students feel emotionally involved with who we are talking about. So the idea that you can have these kinds of simulations of poverty might not only be a wake-up sign for students that didn't even really think about personal budgets, but it's also a really great way for students to empathize with entire populations.
So, the next thing I want to talk about is a little different. It's called Subite LC, and it's based on the bus transit system of Bogota, Colombia, which currently is kind of a mess. It's run by a series of individual operators who are all competing with each other. They've tried some other new bus systems in the past, but they've already become overcrowded and expensive. So they're trying a new one now called the Integrated Public Transit System, or SEEP, and they're hoping it will alleviate this one. But it has a complicated fare system that varies based on route, time of day, the type of passenger. It requires passengers to make a number of transfers between the pre-existing systems, which is creating a lot of confusion. To try to help this, they created a game called Subite LC, which translates to Get On, the Integrated Public Transit System. That presents a simplified, easy-to-understand version of the game. Players will do the whole process of hailing the bus, using the transit card to deduct the appropriate fare. They actually drive the bus at one point, which is not how the transit system actually works.
Looks a little like GTA.
It does. I think it's got a real GTA feel to it. And you can drive on the sidewalks. I'm not saying I found that out. So then you transfer between systems and hopefully arrive at your destination on time, depending on how much you've played it like GTA. But I think this is a great use of really simple immersive design, which you've seen in other games before. before, that helps players to navigate a really complicated system and accomplish a very practical task. I, for one, would love if something similar to this existed for the New York or Boston subway system.
Yes.
How great would it be if before you went somewhere new, you could put in your destination and then play through a simulated version of your trip? Just a heads up, anyone, developers out there looking for a game idea, feel free to take that one. I want to play it. The last one I'll talk about is called Blind Side. So this is the one that I co-created. It is an audio-only adventure board game that simulates some of the challenges of learning without sight and a play experience that's designed for the same for both sighted and visually impaired gamers. When you play the game, it uses a pair of stereo headphones and the gyroscope of your phone to create a virtual world that you can hear but will never see. When you put on the headphones, hold your phone, and turn to face different directions in the real world, it'll sound as if you're turned to face different directions in our virtual world. In the narrative of the game, players will wake up to discover they've lost the ability to see. They must figure out why they're blind, if they can get their sight back, all while trying to avoid being eaten by the terrifying monsters that roam the darkness. Some of those things more realistic than others. But it was actually based on the personal experience of the game's other co-creator, Erin Ryan, you can see on the left here, who was temporarily blinded in a high school chemistry accident. So he lost his ability to see for about a month and has since recovered. But our goal with the game was really to capture the essence of what Erin's experience was like and try to attempt to communicate that to players. Really, what would it be like to wake up and find you with something no longer able to see? So we approached this in a couple of ways. We simulated an audio virtual reality by sort of piggybacking the way your brain interprets sound, 3D sound in the real world. We built a fully bounded, navigable 3D virtual environment, and if you could see in the game, which you can, it would look something like this: a gray-blocked rooms with walls, furniture that you could bump into, and we gave our players some tools for navigating that. One of these was based on a reward technique used by visually impaired individuals called trailing, where they actually let you run your hand along a wall as you're walking along it. So we modeled that in the game. And we also included a simulated form of occlusion through walls. So if you're actually walking down a hallway not touching anything, you can tell just by the sound, the change in sound as you pass a doorway, that there's a doorway there without actually touching anything. And we use this to simulate a number of areas, including busy street which you have to cross. We based it on Commonwealth Avenue out here in Boston. And we also used it to simulate an empty classroom with a couple of desks that you had to find. And this actually was one of the more challenging parts of the game because we had no audio clue to figure out where those desks were. But I believe, so we got some great results in the game actually. We had some great feedback, some very nice reviews. We were nominated for a couple of awards and actually won an award from the Games for Change Festival this past year. The games were recommended for use in classrooms to help students gain some better insight into blindness.
Empathy. It's important, Holmes.
And so, in conclusion, I think games have the power to create really memorable, meaningful experiences. And especially when they're used in innovative ways, games can help to explain complex ideas, solve practical problems, or communicate unique experiences. And especially as easier to use game development tools become available, I can't wait to see what kinds of experiential learning games will be created in the future, especially if it's a game that will help you navigate the subway systems of New York or Boston.
And Mike probably won't show for his own game, but you guys can download that at the App Store.
Yeah, check it out.
It's blindsideinfo.blindsidegame.com.
There you go.
All right, so I want to talk about the subject in a really broad sense of video games and education, because it's something, it's not a new idea, right? You know, this is something that has been together, or at least thought of together, almost since the inception of video games. But it seems like the video game industry really took off, and this video games and education didn't exactly keep up pace with it. So I want to talk about video games and education in context of 2014, because what we have right now are new challenges that haven't always been there, and new opportunities. I'd also like to address some of the stereotypes and some of the points that I think are important in this conversation. One of which is that video games are already inherently educational. If the question is, how do we use video games to teach? The answer is they already do. If you guys are playing video games, you're learning things. If your kids are playing video games, they're learning things as well. I think there's sort of a tendency among people who don't play games to put it in the same category as watching TV. Because they see someone sort of staring at a screen, and it looks very similar to how someone would be watching a sitcom or watching a movie or whatnot. But those of us who do play games know there's a super important difference between those two activities. And that's that watching TV is a passive activity. No matter what you're doing, that TV show is going to play. So you could be hanging on every word, absorbing all this information, but you could be passed out almost, and that TV show is still going to be going on. Whereas video games are an active activity. They require your participation. So if you just sit there and don't do anything, games are just going to sit there and not do anything. This is in Borderlands where your character asks you if you're going to the bathroom or if you may be on the phone.
I want to do 0.
Yes.
Is someone in the bathroom? On the phone.
So really, you look at someone who's watching TV, and they look very similar to someone who's playing a video game. But it's really not about what's going on out here. It's about what's happening in here. And so what is happening? There's learning, there's thinking, there's solving puzzles, there's strategizing. To play a game, you need to learn how to play a game. You need to learn the rules of the game. You need to learn how to beat that boss, the best strategies to survive, the best way to get a high score, and so on. So basically, that brain is doing work as it's playing video games. To test this theory, you could find someone who's never played Portal before and hand them a controller and put them on the last level of Portal and see how they do. The reason they'd be so lost is because you spend so much time playing Portal, learning how to play Portal. You know, you're learning the physics of the world, the rules, the puzzles, the strategies, what the different objects do, and so forth.
Yeah.
How important cake is.
Yeah.
and you know, the learning curve is the game.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool.
And whether or not that cake is a lie, even. Still up some big philosophy class. So really, it's a new form of learning. So what we're not talking about how do we get video games to teach, because they already are. What we're talking about is how do we take these new methods of learning and combining them with the traditional educational curriculum. So can we merge the learning behind solving a puzzle, defeating a boss battle, learning the mechanics of a new game with science and math and literature and English and so forth?
Yes.
No audio is again. So by the time I finally finished playing the entirety of the Mass Effect trilogy, I could tell you all sorts of things about that world. The world that I knew nothing about going into it because it was totally new. So I can tell you, the history of the Citadel, the controversy of the genophage, the foundation of the Council, all this super nerdy stuff, right? But it taught me fake history and fake science. And what I took away from that is if it was possible to do that, then it was certainly possible to learn real history and real science. But that means that video game developers would need to make it a priority to teach us, to inject education into their games. But right now, it really isn't for a huge portion of the video game industry. Because it's exactly that, it's an industry, it's a business, and it's a huge business at that. If anyone has tried to traverse the expo hall, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In the US alone, it's a $25 billion business. So their priority is to make games that excite us, that get us to give them money, and not necessarily for our, educational benefit. There's a brain scientist out there named Daphne Bathlier, who studies how video games can improve various forms of cognition, the way our brains think, the way they work, and she says that the video games are very much capable of doing this, but again, it's the same thing as education. It's not the priority of the developers right now to help us with things like memory retention and increasing our vision and so forth. And she uses a metaphor that I love, I think is really appropriate to the conversation here. And that's the following one. She says that there are certain aspects of a video game not all video games are beneficial, but there are certain things within games that are very positive. And she calls that the broccoli side of the equation because it's good for you. And then there is what the video game developers and the industry is generally really good at, which is creating exciting and appealing games. And that's the chocolate side of the equation. And so what we need is a new movement to sort of merge the two to come together. And it's also proof that you can find anything on Google Images. I was like, there's no way this exists. Yeah, it exists. And this is also, I have to say, it's not to disparage broccoli because it's delicious. It's that the video game industry right now has a whole lot of Willy Wonkas and not too many, organic farmers. People who aren't adept at making these things that are actually good for you. And so that's where teachers come into it. And this is, I think, a super important point, that's why I'm making it, is that educational games need educators. I mentioned TV earlier, and there are a fair amount of studies out there that actually show that people who watch TV don't learn anything just based on watching TV. But you can actually learn a great deal if you have conversations about TV, if you decide to read about the television show you just watched and break it down in sort of an academic setting. And it's really why we have classrooms and teachers at all. You don't just assign a student the Great Gatsby and expect them to walk away with a deeper understanding of the 20s in the context of 20th century America.
I want to play that so bad.
Yeah. I think one example is BioShock, right? That is a pretty brutal critique of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. But a lot of that is lost on you if you don't know who Ayn Rand is, if you've never read Atlas Shrugged. And so that's why the teachers and the classroom and the conversation really come into play. I also want to say, this doesn't even necessarily have to be inside the classroom. This could be in video game clubs, where after school, teachers can get involved in things like video game clubs and supervise them, where it's an academic setting that's not necessarily inside the classroom.
In BioShock, speaking of which, Andrew Ryan, BioShock actually used BioShock to talk about things like power. And there's a really moving speech at the beginning of BioShock, for anyone who's played it, hopefully you all have, where they're talking about the big isms, communism, and I'm a wife, so I know these things, communism and capitalism and what it is to have a theocratic society. So you can use components in video games as well to just get the ball rolling and get your students thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why if Erin were in the school system in this country, the themes of BioShock would be an elective you could take in your school classrooms. But
I'm working on that.
that's why we're here. But not right now. So basically, saying that it's not enough for a game just to be educational, for a developer to make something and then for people to play it and then try to take something educational from it. It's that educators need to be involved in every step of the way. Erin was talking about those different methods of learning and those different foundations of pedagogy. And those need to be baked into the video game from the design to the implementation stage of the educational games. And that requires teachers to embrace gaming and school curriculums to embrace those teachers who do. And that is happening in some places. In a national survey of about 500 teachers who used video games in the classroom, the results were overwhelmingly positive. About 60% said that they were better able to assess knowledge. 62% said that games increased the motivation and engagement amongst their students. And 70% reported that there was higher. They were better able to assess knowledge, and they were able to increase motivation and engagement with those students. The numbers that responded that they had negative experiences were less than 10% overall. But too often, teachers don't even get to this point of assessment because they reject video games outright. They see it as contrary to what they're trying to do in the classroom, and they automatically adopt sort of this hostile attitude towards games. There's a woman named Alison Carr-Chelman who conducted a study on conducted a survey of teachers and found that exactly that. A lot of teachers were dismissing games, were outright hostile, going so far as to banning students from writing about video games in their classroom. The students were engaged, they loved games, and they wanted to write about them, and the teachers rejected that. And she said that this was a lost opportunity to turn students onto schoolwork, and instead they turned them off of it. And she has a quote that if video games are what they're interested in, and we ban them from writing about it, we're sending them the message that they don't belong here. Erin, when you tell students that you play video games, what's the general reaction from them?
It's like, like, what are you? Let's talk about it. So we talk about how I like sank 400 hours into Skyrim, and they're like, who are you? I'm like, I'm a wood elf. I thought it was going to pay off way more than it did. And just the fact that, we're having a dialogue is great. And you can see students start lighting up because they're finding that I'm talking their language, which I think is extremely important teaching millennials. They are so smart. I have to keep driving this home to my kids. The millennials are so smart. They're so fast. They're reading so much. They're so much more globalized. We have all this potential in this incredible generation, and yet you're seeing people cutting them off from their interests. That is just, to me, it's total backwards thinking, and I'm ready to move forward.
Yeah, and so if we need teachers to be involved in this educational video games movement, in this process, it requires that teachers be open to it and be accepting of it, and it's why it's so awesome to see you guys here today. And that actually brings me to my next point, is that there needs to be more education about video games. People inside PAX get what's going on. It's how many people outside of PAX understand what's going on in here. And I don't just mean don't know what's going on in here, but have an active misunderstanding of video games. That's right.
Look at him go.
So my background is in American Studies, and I've spent a lot of my time studying how we can teach history through music. And that's really different from the history of music. Can we look at a society and take a look at the musicians they created and the music that came out of it and what was celebrated, and what does that tell us about that society? And I think video games have the same potential. Just like books, movies, and music have done in the past, we can look at our video games to see what that says about who we are as a society. The problem is right now, most of the times where I hear people talk about what video games tell us about our society, don't know anything about video games, and that's a problem. So what happens when you have this major cultural force, but not much education about what that cultural force is?
That she has an affinity for the fantasy game called Dark Soul, which is a very dark, death-laden video game on PlayStation and other kind of video type things.
Where video games have occurs the killing of innocent people for sport.
These video games to me are murder simulators is what they are. And it's very dangerous, John, very dangerous.
Ford reviewed 4 different video games and found no conveyance of ideas, expression, or anything else that could possibly amount to speech. Stephen Limbaugh.
I think there's a question as to whether he would have even driven in his mother's car in the first place if he didn't have access to a weapon that he saw in video games that gave him a false sense of courage about what he could do.
I think video games is a bigger problem than guns.
Boys that play video games cannot tell the difference between what they're seeing in a video game and the real world if they don't have a real experience.
All right, look, who can argue possibly that, Luke Skywalker meets Debbie Does Dallas is a good thing? It's not. It's just not good. And I'm definitely not going to want Mass Effect in my house.
Isn't this stuff painful? When you've played Mass Effect and you know it's closer to Star Wars meets Sleepless in Seattle than it is to Debbie Does Dallas, and you hear someone say that, it's like, oh man, how were they on TV? But they have this audience, and they are speaking about video games. So my point is this: if we take this already educational medium, merge it with the core curricular subjects, and get actual educators involved, we'll see an increase in student engagement and a decrease of ignorance across the board. Yeah, these mics aren't made for dropping per se, so I can't, but this is where I do that.
I'm out.
Done.
can do right now before we wrap up and get to your questions and get to your comments. And I just want to show you guys, this is what I did last summer. I was working, like I said, I've been working in different mental health facilities for students that are dealing with different kinds of issues. And they're trying to work through it, not just work through adolescence, but work through these different disabilities that they have. And this was last summer. I got the hospital to sign on to a summer program, which was excellent, because that meant that I could get some credit for these kids that were failing. And I had about 10 to 14 students. As you can see, we were kind of smashed into this very tiny little room. And it was an inclusion classroom. For all the teachers out there, you know what I mean. This is something that is a very, very popular trend right now, where you are including all students of all ability levels. And for me, it was all students from grades 6 to 12. So I could have a student that was a 7th grader sitting next to a senior, and my job was to make sure that they had a successful, credit-worthy learning experience for that day. So I'm super jazzed. I got a summer program, we're set to go, this is gonna be great. How many of these kids want to do schoolwork during summer vacation time? Not very many, right? And it's already tough because a lot of these kids, like I said, are dealing with things that are beyond my understanding. So again, I had to crank up the empathy here, and I had to think, if I were a student that was trapped in a hospital, I actually had personal experience. I was trapped myself in a hospital for about 6 months beating cancer. If it weren't for video games and it weren't for my fabulous mother playing Pokemon Stadium with me, I don't know if I would have gotten through it the way that I did. So I had this idea. I wanted to come up with a lesson plan that was engaging for these students. And it made me think about what we can do right now. And my number one answer is share ideas. For anybody who has ideas on how we can combine these two fields, I want to hear it, I want to talk about it, and I want to investigate it. And my idea was to come up with this project. For inclusion classrooms, project-based curriculums are really effective because you can have different skill sets, different students that are strong here and they don't really want to write a lot, but maybe they want to draw, or they might be a little bit more musical in their learning. So how do I incorporate all those students into one project? This was my answer. So number one, it was pretty cool. My kids thought, okay, this teacher, she's a little strange. She wants us to create video games. And it was more about designing a game. And the first thing that I did for students, especially those that didn't know very much about video games, was review basic genre. My idea was to empower these students. I wanted them to creatively take charge of what they were learning about, and I wanted them to work as a team, but I also wanted them to get their history for the day. And what was so shocking about this project when I did it is that I thought I was going to have to hold their hands every step of the way. I thought that I was going to have to make sure that they were staying on task. But you know what? I had to shut up eventually. I had to take a step back and let these kids roll, because they took it and they ran with it. And I started seeing these students that came in and said, you know, I hate my teachers, I hate school, I hate all this, I don't fit into the system. And I saw them become leaders. I saw them take charge and start becoming the heads of development teams. And I just, you know, as a teacher, you know there's a moment where you know to shut up and step back and let the kids do it, let the kids learn it. So after we reviewed genres so that they knew what we were talking about, here's the first page. I wanted them to think about what kind of genres they would use if they were designing a game, examples of those genres. And then probably the most important piece of this page, day one, is the prompt that I give them on row numeral 3, which is, how do you deal with violence? Over and over again, we see these games that are very based on violence, on violent action taken by the player. And I know that no school district is going to want to accept a game or okay a game that has a student participating in violence. And my students, when I asked them, what part of history did you feel like as you were learning about it, you didn't really understand it, and you wanted to immerse yourself more in it? And hands down, they wanted to know more about the civil rights movement. I was like, yeah, let's do it. That's great. Let's go. So here's a little example here of some student work. And we decided as a team that we wanted to do an adventure action RPG with a couple of stealth components. And you can see here that they were referencing games like Skyrim and Assassin's Creed, Bioshock. And look at how this is. They wanted to participate as non-violent activists during the civil rights movement, and although there might be violent historical events that are happening that they're witnessing, they're not going to take part in it. They're not going to participate in that. Instead, they're going to witness history, which sounds like your run-of-the-mill average history classroom where kids are witnessing pretty violent things on their textbook pages, but they're not participating. They're witnessing history. They even had a great idea to, instead of being armed with a weapon, to be armed with a camera, which was music to my ears, because I'm trying to show them how the civil rights movement was effective, and that had a lot to do with cameras and television, and the fact that it was all of a sudden in people's living rooms and they couldn't deny it or avoid it anymore. So that was great. I was like, yeah, arm yourself with cameras. I could do a great homework assignment on that, right? Play around, go ride the bus with Rosa Parks, take a couple of pictures, and write a response on it. Come in tomorrow and we'll talk about it. And this stuff is possible.
I will fund that kid's Kickstarter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We talked about setting. We talked about character development. We were talking about, do you want your students to be assigned a role, or do you want them to choose? And my kids were so brilliant that when we were talking, we stayed on the same slide one day, and it was that image, I don't know if you guys have seen it, of Elizabeth Eckford. She's got her books tucked up, and she's a black girl. She's trying to integrate Little Rock High School, and the governor, Orville Faubus, said, no, we're going to shut down the schools rather than letting these 9 kids in. They were called the Little Rock 9. So that became the premise of our game. You are a Little Rock 9 student, and the first scene is you're trying to get to school, and they won't let you in. So because you're not allowed to go to school, kids, then you have to get onto a bus, onto a Freedom Rider bus, and you eventually end up, see, they had it going a span of 12 years here from 1957 to 1968, and you would start in Arkansas, and you would travel America, so you're learning your geography as well, and you'd end up in Boston in 68, so you talk about the forced busing that was going on here. And we ended up writing a letter to Elizabeth Eckford to ask her permission to use her character. It was pretty amazing stuff. We also found out that one of the Little Rock 9 was named Jefferson Thomas. I mean, you can't write this stuff. It's already there in history. And the kids are going, what? And they're going to remember that because they had an invested interest in what they were doing. This is an example of a solution that I made as far as tiering for students. So if a student didn't want to write about the setting and they didn't want to write about the characters, they could draw it out. And this lent itself to storyboarding. So they would be able to storyboard different levels and different assignments and tasks and missions that students would partake in. I mean, this was amazing. I ended up writing a letter to Irrational Games just asking them, what do you think of this idea? Do you think this is possible? And then here at step 3 is picture game. And this has a lot to do with, again, the Common Core, this idea of being able to have a project and have a central idea and communicate it. So this was their spot where they would write on their first draft of what I called an elevator speech. You have 30 seconds with the game developer, go. You have to try to convince them that your game is worthy of funding and investment. So they were writing their pitches, they were editing, they were peer editing, they were rehearsing with each other, and as a final step for me to understand whether or not they had gotten all the content that we were covering, I was the executive, and they had to pitch it to me, and I asked them follow-ups, and to me it was a really successful program. To the point where I didn't even think about certain components. They thought of the idea of, hey, we should probably bring in historically accurate songs from the time too. So I went on my computer, I cranked out this video game soundtrack worksheet as fast as I possibly could. I went online and I researched some of the top songs that were played each year, the Billboard hits, and then we just had a music day where we listened to the different songs, and they were kind of sitting there going, I don't know if we could apply that one. Oh, Hit the Road Jack, that would be good because we're going to be in buses. I brought in GarageBand, and we created our own original song that would play during the load screen, and they were listening to different, bus sound effects, and it was amazing. So it's one of those things that when you see great things and you see students doing incredible things, you have to reach out, you have to show that to the rest of the world, which is why we're here at PAX.
And can I just say two of the things that I think are absolutely brilliant about this lesson plan is one, it's bringing video games into the classroom without using video games, right? Not everyone has access to video games. Not every classroom is equipped with a PS4. But this is a way to bring in video game culture and bring in the topic of video games in a way where you don't actually have to use that oftentimes expensive technology. The other thing is that it works for the students who love video games, right? The students who are all about gaming and gaming culture, this is a way to bring their world into their studies. And for the students who don't know much about video games, this teaches them a bit about it. Just like the last point I was saying about there needs to be more education about video games. The students who don't know much about gaming see that it's maybe larger than it's portrayed in the media, or it's larger than the Angry Bird or whatever they're playing on their phones and whatnot. That video games can tackle much larger subjects, along with the more the mediums that are usually seen as more mature, like movies and books.
Yeah, I can't get no satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, 1965. At one point, one of my students, we were learning about the Woolworth sit-in, which happened when a couple of kids went into Woolworth, the lunch counter, and sat there very peacefully. They weren't served because they weren't allowed to be served at that time. And then all of a sudden, this crowd started growing, and people started actually pouring food and pouring hot coffee onto these nonviolent protesters. Again, you're witnessing something that's pretty difficult to witness, but you're not participating in it, you're seeing it. And that's what we're doing for our students. We're having them witness history. And one of my kids at one point was like, we could do D.D. Sharp's mashed potato time, ironically. Okay. It's amazing. And again, this is in the dead of summer. We have a faulty air conditioner, and we're packed like sardines into this little room in this hospital. And these kids are kicking ass. They're amazing. So I wanted to show you guys what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do as far as getting the dialogue started. If I had a couple hundreds of millions of dollars, I would make these things a reality. So I think it's really great to show that it is possible. Sitting on the dock of the bay is how we can roll it out there at the end of Otis Redding in Boston. I thought that was great. So today, again, we have these essential questions. I encourage you to have those questions continually rolling around in your mind. We talked a little bit about foundations and some of the pedagogical theories that support these games. We talked about what it is to have empathetic gaming, where students relate and students learn something about their environment, like how to ride the T. We talked a little bit about what we can do now as far as battling some of those stereotypes and talking a lot less about yes or no. I want to talk yes and no. I don't want to talk about this robotic world of standardized testing anymore, where kids have to decide between A or B or C or D. I want A, B, X, Y, a little bit of joystick in there, maybe some Oculus Rift.
There are some achievements, a couple trophies.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about increasing the debate and the debate factor in the classroom. Having students come in, like I said, to recognize their own biases, to be able to debate and do it in a respectful way. And say, I don't know if that D.D. Sharp song would work there, maybe it would work here instead. So that was my lesson share. We want to open it up here for some Q&A. We have a mic there. If anybody has any questions, we'd love to take them. Thank you guys so much for being here. Shout us out. I'm on Twitter at Lesson Block, and Andrew's Whiskey and Games, and Mike is Michael Astolfi, so absolutely.
And in this question and answer session, we're obviously more than happy to take questions, but we also want to hear about your experiences. We have a lot of teachers in this room, developers, students, so if you want to tell us what you've been doing and how you've incorporated games merging with education, we'd love to hear that as well.